I'm going to call the advisory committee meeting to order for November 16th, 2021. This meeting is being held remotely as an alternate means of public access pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, temporarily amending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting is, and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. Is anyone else recording the meeting this evening? Okay, hearing none. Next on the agenda, we have, are there any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? Okay, not hearing any. So we're going to go a tiny bit out of order tonight, just on one item. We're going to move the discussion of the financial policy update up to the forefront of our meeting agenda, because what's happening tonight is that later in our meeting, Bob, George, and Caitlin are going to head over to the select board meeting so that they can give the select board the latest and greatest and our input on the financial policy. And the capital markets advisors have also reviewed our proposed changes, and the school committee reviewed them last night, and they had a couple of suggestions. Next will be the select board tonight, and then we will also solicit input from capital outlay. So with that, I want to say thank you again to Bob and George and Caitlin, because they all have been working very hard on this important financial policy update. And so thank you. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bob and the group.
Thanks, Julie. George and Caitlin and I have been working diligently away. I think we're up to version 6.5 of the financial policy. Sue, do you have the one that shows the red line and my comments as well as Liza's comments? It's put up on the screen. I think Julie distributed it this afternoon.
I think that's the one I have, isn't it?
I'm not seeing any red line, or I don't know whether.
Yep, just change it. I think it's how you're reviewing the review. You have to go in and say view all markup. It looks like you're just viewing a simple markup.
Okay, hold on one sec. Gee, I thought I had this all done.
I can send it to you if you need me to.
I have it. I just, okay, Nancy, what do you do? View.
When you go up to review on the toolbar and it says,
yeah. Oh, show markup.
Under the show markup, you should have show all selected. Are you seeing that?
I do. The only thing is that
do you want me to display it on mine?
Yeah, can I make you I can make you co-host.
Yeah, hold on, let me pull up the copy that came today.
Nancy, I've got it open if
okay, why don't George, why don't you do it? Fine.
Okay, George, hold on. Okay, now you should be able to. Sorry.
This is a hot mess.
All right, so when I click, oh, share. All right.
We can see it.
Well,
Okay.
that's not what I got this afternoon.
Have you got Liza Riley's comments on this, George?
All 5,000 of them.
There's your comments, Bob. And there's Liza. Yep.
Okay, all right. All right, the colors are just coming through differently.
All right.
So everybody, what you're seeing in blue is what you have seen before and what was previously discussed at the last meeting that I was not at. Since that time, the entire scope of the proposed revisions to the financial policy has been reviewed by capital market advisors. And they were especially requested to address the change in the definition of total annual expenditures, TAE. And they basically came back to us and said that they thought it was a good idea to change TAE to take the enterprise funds out of TAE, as it was anticipated that those enterprises would be establishing their own reserves, and that we didn't need to overburden the 20% of unrestricted, or 16 to 20% of unrestricted fund balance by adding about $18 million to TAE by including the enterprise funds. So otherwise, capital market advisors had no other suggestions and was generally in accord with the proposed revisions. So last night, George and Caitlin and myself presented a walkthrough of all of the changes to the school committee. And what I thought I would do tonight is update you on the feedback that we got from that hearing last night. And so, yeah, on paragraph 7 that's on your screen now, it was suggested that we, in the examples of a pandemic, a climate disaster, that we also add a sudden unexpected revenue loss. That would seem to make sense to me. And Julie, I don't know if you want to discuss these as we go through them or wait till the end.
Well, probably while they're right in front of us, let's talk about them.
Well, I guess I'd simply ask, does everybody think that makes sense?
So Bob, the only thing I would say is that, we're talking about pandemics and disasters, and then we're talking about a sudden unexpected revenue loss. So, I mean, that could be insignificant dollars or it could be significant. So should we put some kind of a qualifier in there? Major.
Sure, major sounds good.
Unexpected revenue loss.
Why would you add this, Bob?
Well, I suppose, first of all, members of the school committee thought it was a good idea. And I think that they are looking at the experience last year of the sudden unexpected revenue losses that were related to the pandemic. So it may be somewhat duplicative with respect to what happens when you have a pandemic or a climate disaster. It is likely we're going to have a sudden major unexpected revenue loss, but
I think the example was like a recession, or like 2008 when the housing market crashed. I think that was the example that she had given for the unexpected revenue loss, which isn't necessarily covered in the current language.
I don't see any harm. I think it probably is helpful.
The only harm I see is that it's quite debatable as to what's a sudden unexpected revenue loss. And those are pretty mushy terms in terms of sudden, unexpected. And you're going to add major, that is a good addition, but it's also kind of mushy. So I don't, it's a little too uncertain for my liking, frankly, but.
Andy, could you refer to something like whether it's like a state or federal defined event, right? If I think about pandemic or climate disaster, those usually go hand in hand with some kind of federal or state aid. I mean, I'm probably pulling at straws there, but.
I mean, I understand what a pandemic is and what I can imagine what a climate disaster would be, but I don't know what a sudden unexpected major revenue loss is. But that's one person's question mark, and I will defer to the majority, of course. I would add a comma after EG before a pandemic, but that's a minor matter.
I mean, technically, I guess it could fall under similar events, right? Well, you're kind of already covering it a little bit there.
Well, something that impacts the town's operations and resources. Yeah.
Would it be helpful just to eliminate the examples and just say under emergency circumstances which impact the town's operations and resources? I mean, maybe we complicate it by giving examples.
I think that's a good suggestion, George.
I agree with that, George.
Daveline has her hand up. Daveline, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it seemed to me that resources would include an unexpected revenue loss because you would have lesser resources available. So but I agree, just taking out the example is a good idea.
Okay. So it seems like we have a consensus on just take out the examples. All right, and later in the same paragraph, the school committee, Carrie, I think very appropriately noted that we should include the school committee probably by inserting school committee after the language select board, because that's essentially what happened last year between the select board, the school committee, and the town administrator. That's how the emergency protocols were developed.
Bob, just a quick question on that. Did AdCom have a role in that as well, or was ours just one of observation?
AdCom did have a role. I mean, the group that met was basically Julie and myself, the town administrator, the chair of the Board of Selectmen, the chair and vice chair of the school committee, and we didn't really take formal votes, but it was a planned out discussion where a consensus was reached really without any controversy.
Well, I guess to that, where I was going with that is then should we add an advisory committee in there as well?
I think that's probably a good idea as well.
Would you want to say, instead of calling out advisory committee, would you want to say applicable boards and committees? Because depending on what the emergency is, might call in different committees.
Well, I think we're basically talking about management controls. And between the select board, town administrator, the school committee, and the AdCom, we would be, I think, the people with oversight over some specific boards, if that's the kind of thing that arose. But
I agree, Bob.
so I think
that makes sense.
Then, do we have a consensus that we add school committee and advisory committee?
Yes, for me.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you could scroll down to paragraph 13.
George is driving, right?
Driving.
Oh, George is driving. So, right.
That's right.
I forgot we did a fire drill where the drivers were exchanged. There was some back and forth on this one last night, mostly between myself and Liza O'Reilly. Liza felt we should keep the word emergent as well as the word emergency. And her point, as stated in the comment that she provided today, was that in the past, there have been things that the town could see developing that could have made the town go in the direction of eliminating the unused levy capacity to address those concerns. My feeling, and I think Julie and I talked about this afternoon, and I think we're in agreement, is that this doesn't really reflect what's going on with unused levy capacity. Unused levy capacity is money that we could have had by taxing it, but we don't have because we didn't tax it. So it's not like we had a fund that we could plug into use as a stopgap for something. Unused levy capacity, of course, can be eliminated, I believe, by action of the select board. And it also seems that in the next few years, it is not likely that we are going to have any unused levy capacity. The previous unused levy capacity of $500,000 was something that the select board voted to devote to targeted tax relief for qualifying seniors. So what the exact status of the unused levy capacity, if any, is going to be this year remains to be seen. In any event, it's my feeling, and I think Julie agrees as well, I don't know about others, that we do not need the word emergent in addition to emergency.
I certainly agree with that. It seems clear that emergent appeared as a typo.
I think that's right.
Can I ask though, where would her concerns, like where would that fall into this policy? If it's, I get that it's just, maybe it doesn't belong on the unused levy capacity, but where would things like that fall?
Well, if there were some circumstance that was judged worthy of coming up with additional town funds, that would have to come through a reserve fund transfer or the use of unrestricted fund balance, or depending on how dire the situation was, it could come through an override. And all of those things are otherwise addressed in the financial policy.
Okay.
So do we have a consensus on leaving emergent out?
I would.
Okay, not
Bob, I'll quickly take one last run at Liza's language, because the most compelling reason you gave is I think it's highly unlikely we have any unused levy capacity in the foreseeable future. But let's assume for the moment that the $500K hadn't been allocated to the senior tax reduction program, and it was still on the books today. I mean, couldn't we argue that, kind of to Caitlin's point, that today we don't necessarily have an emergency, but we might certainly look at unused levy capacity today and say, man, we've got some budget, changes that we made last year that we need to, incur and cover into the future. Federal funds are going away. Hence, we're going to, in other words, I guess I would rephrase the question as one of, in this, I agree this paragraph is weird and it's in an odd place. And I think that's what gives us a little bit of heartburn, is that if we still had unused levy capacity, we don't really speak to the circumstances under which that could be considered. And maybe that's because we punt it to the select board, which is appropriate. We can't change it, they can. But I guess I would just say that the emergent, even though that word is like emergency, it feels to me that there would have been a benefit in having a safety valve for the use or the consideration of the use of unused levy capacity somewhere in this policy. And I don't know where else it goes if not here. See, I'm happy to have it go somewhere else.
I think that the select board can get rid of unused levy capacity at any time.
Right, but do we want any guidance in the policy as to when that should be considered? I think that was Liza's point.
Yeah. I have to be honest, I don't fully understand what unused levy capacity is yet. So I don't know where it's appropriate to use it, but I think what Liza is talking to are real situations that we should ensure that they're covered somewhere.
Let me give you an example. I mean, suppose the real estate tax levy at a full 2.5% would be 80 million. And instead of doing the full 2.5% to get 80 million, you determine the tax rate so that you only get 79,500,000. That's basically what the town was doing. And the town was doing that basically to provide some tax relief to the citizens, to let people appreciate that they weren't being taxed as much as the town could actually tax
them. The examples that Liza cites are not, I would argue, do not fall within the proper definition of emergent. An example in the dictionary of emergent is blockchain is an emergent technology.
Well, the example that Liza gave was in the past, there were emerging needs for additional school personnel. Not an emergency, but again, I just see it's completely within the purview of the select board to eliminate it anytime they want, unused levy capacity to meet the town's revenue needs. I'm happy to do whatever the consensus feels we should do.
We in the paragraph on reserve fund transfers, I believe also uses the word emergency, and many of those transfers no one would consider to be a dire emergency. But so I don't think the word emergency here translates to pandemic. I'm satisfied with emergency and not emergent. And
any other views?
Bob, I'm having difficulty raising my hand, so please excuse me. But what if we said something about, after targeted tax relief, or to address a budgetary shortfall, or something along those lines?
Have we ever used unused levy capacity for that?
I don't know the history of it, but I mean,
Unused levy
that's the whole
memory.
idea, right? Is that we
I
would
believe
tax up
unused-
to the levy, so we'd have the additional revenue to, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
you
Liza's
can't
concern, is if we tax to the full levy, then we would have had an additional $500,000 that could have been used for the schools or the municipal budgets.
Is that simply provoking a further debate about a particular department, or in this case, the school's budget concerns beyond the budget votes?
Sue, you were going to say something about this.
Well, I was going to say, you can't just use unused levy capacity. Once the tax rate is set and you have unused levy capacity, I mean, that's it. You can't just go, send out bills for, $500,000. It's done in the budget process. So, and once, the year is done, that levy capacity is lost. You can't just, take from last year and add to this year. So for that $500,000, that was for that particular fiscal year. If you wanted to add to it, the next year you would have to do $500,000 plus another $500,000 to have $1 million. I don't know how you use unused levy capacity. The only way you could use it is to send out another tax bill. And I'm not sure you can do that.
Historically, unused levy capacity came in, I think, when Bruce Rebuffo was chair of the select board.
Yeah, for tax relief, to middle school.
The idea was to provide tax relief. And then until last year, the language about targeted tax relief was never invoked until the select board was looking for a source to fund $500,000 of targeted tax relief for seniors concerning the property tax. And that's basically the whole history.
Sarah, you had your hand raised at one point. Sarah still here?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just thinking, if we're going to leave something in there along those lines, could we say something more like, provides the flexibility to address foreseeable or unforeseeable future requirements. I mean, if you're not at full levy capacity in one year, in the next year, you may be able to increase levy capacity, whether on an emergency or non-emergency basis. And I think, like Sue was saying, even if there is an emergency, you can't just increase it right now. So I don't know. I just say the emergency next to each other, I think is too confusing and looks like a typo. So I think if we were going to say something like that, we could maybe consider something like foreseeable and unforeseeable future requirements. That's just a thought.
Let me pick up on George's previous point and maybe eliminate the specifics and add some language that says it provides a certain amount of fiscal flexibility, comma, and is viewed favorably.
I think that I like Sarah's language. That works for me because I think that covers both. I think that says what you're saying too, Andy. That's my 2 cents.
I'm really confused, and I apologize for my confusion, but unused levy capacity is money we didn't take in. So how are we, why is this language not, why aren't we just pointing this to fund balance?
Because next year we can choose
doing an emergency. Right, but shouldn't That's not going to address an emergency.
If we had a current need for funds, it can't be addressed with unused levy capacity.
Right.
It would be addressed by the use of fund balance.
See, that's why the theory that there was a typo may be incorrect.
Yeah, I don't think it was a typo.
Suppose we just said budgetary requirements.
Well, I'll promise I'll shut up after this. The thing I like about Sarah's language is that it includes the unforeseeable piece, which is budgetary requirements to me suggest something that's in the budget and only something that's in the budget. But I'm done.
I mean, Liza was arguing about how, it could be that there's an increase in the student population. So something is emerging so anyway, I agree with some combination or version of what Sarah said and what Andy just said.
Or how about what Robert just said, provides flexibility to address budgetary requirements.
All right, we could put in unforeseeable budgetary requirements.
Or not use budgetary, to Dave's point, and just say financial requirements.
That's fine with me. Dave Lane, did you want to weigh in on this?
I almost don't, but I must misunderstand, because to me, what this paragraph is trying to say is what is unused levy capacity? How does it come about? And if it's not something we can actually use once we don't use it, then to talk about using it either in an emergent or an emergency situation doesn't make any sense to me. I understand ultimately you use it because it goes to fund balance. But so in that context, I took it to be a description of a thing called unused levy capacity and why we like having unused levy capacity, because it reflects fiscal discipline, blah, blah, blah. So I guess I'm just confused. So I don't know that I should have said anything.
Well, I think the language about provides flexibility to address emergency requirements goes back to some of the things that the rating agencies look at. So for example, if we had a budgetary shortfall that was met by fund balance in 1 year, there would be the flexibility to address it by raising the tax levy to the full 2.5% without having to go to an override. That's the flexibility it provides.
Move the question.
I'm fine with however you want to put it, I guess at this point.
What was the last, Dave, where were we?
I liked Sarah's language because I think it got to what Andy was speaking to too.
All right, and what's the language we want to put in then?
Provides flexibility to address foreseeable and unforeseeable financial needs, financial requirements.
Yeah, I think I don't even remember what I said now. Yes, I think I said foreseeable and unforeseeable future requirements. Future. Meaning you can't use it now, but we could consider using it.
The problem with that, if you will, is it implies you can do something now. And the whole point of unused levy capacity is you can't do anything now. You can do something in the next budget.
I think that's why I would include the word future after foreseeable or unforeseeable future requirements, because you can't use it now. I agree.
Well, let's Julie, Caitlin, George and I are going to discuss this with the select board later tonight. Why don't I run that language past them, and we'll see where we all come out on that.
And just say that the alternative language we think is okay is provides flexibility to address financial requirements.
Okay. So, and amazingly, last night that provoked the most discussion, just as I think that's probably going to be the thing that provokes the most discussion tonight. So I think we can go on to 18.
Paragraph 7, Bob. You want to there's a insert a space if you want that correction.
The comma after EG?
No, this is paragraph number 7, George.
Yeah.
When unassigned fund balance, it begins.
Paragraph 7. I'm at 13. Where are you, Andy?
Why don't we just send any kind of grammatical corrections to Bob and George instead of spending time?
Good suggestion.
On that now.
Bravo.
Okay, so if we go to 18, Liza suggested deleting the especially clause. At the end of that, she thought that number 1, Prop 2.5 is all throughout this. It's well known, and she thought that it could have a detrimental inference, perhaps, created with respect to collective bargaining. So I certainly don't see it as necessary. The major point is that in doing collective bargaining, we want to look to not only the present, but the future. So is that?
It's not surprising that to me the school committee would want that deleted, because with all due respect, they ignore it in their collective bargaining agreements.
Okay, I think Tom Mayo might actually have the same concern, but I certainly don't think we need to keep it in.
Dave, you have something?
Yeah, if we want to get rid of that, and I agree, I was a little puzzled by the suggestion that it was bad faith to have it in there, but I'll defer to lawyers on that one. What if we struck it and then instead at the beginning of the paragraph 18 said reasonable efforts should be made to identify the cost impact and overall budget impact, both initially and in subsequent years of collective bargaining. So adding the phrase and overall budget impact, that speaks to my concern about this paragraph, which is you got to tell us, you got to study the impact on the budget. And maybe that is a little sneakier way of getting in the 2.5 because it's baked in, but it's critical to me, it seems to me.
I could certainly live with that.
I can live with that as well.
Me too.
I like that, David.
Okay, so we'll put that language in and we'll eliminate the especially.
I'd like to stop on 19. I'm not sure if there's just an errant in the middle of that sentence, but that sentence makes no sense. So
say that again. What?
On paragraph 19, review and implementation as appropriate of the report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force. What are we reviewing? Is it where the findings of the report, the suggestions of the report?
We would be reviewing the report.
It doesn't read well to me either. I always get confused on it.
Review and implementation as appropriate of the report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force.
You want to just eliminate review and?
Or is there an errant of in there? Should it be, I feel like it's meaning to say like the findings of, or.
I think it's review and implement as appropriate the report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force.
I like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, it's better.
So implement, comma, as appropriate, comma.
So I've got review and implement as appropriate the recommendations of the report.
So take out that of, yeah. Review and implement as appropriate the report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force. Okay, that cleared it up. Sorry, I couldn't get past the implementation.
Bob would add the recommendations in the report, I guess, which is
If I'm adding the
kind of covered by
recommendations,
the as appropriate language.
Tina,
I'm doing what I said we shouldn't do, getting in.
Tina's got something.
Just because the Sustainable Budget Task Force is new, are we going to continue to implement this as they move on from their role? Like they're a brand new task force and we're going to put this into our handbook and then potentially update our handbook like each year to stay consistent with the committees that we have.
well, I think the recommendations of the Sustainable Budget Task Force are in some respects going to be a real important augmentation of the financial policy. I mean, presumably they're going to come up with suggestions for a roadmap to sustainability.
I get what you're saying there. I guess I was thinking this was more of an ongoing task force, but are you saying like a kind of a one and done initiative and then it goes away?
I don't think we know necessarily. I mean, I know that they are not, expecting to disband at the end of this budget season. I think this is an ongoing effort for at least the foreseeable number of years. So I don't think it's just quick this year.
Okay.
And if
George, what do you think?
We do review.
I agree. I mean, they're charged with coming up with a 5-year plan, but I think implicit within that is that they will continue to meet, maybe not weekly, or certainly I would hope not weekly, but on an ongoing basis to continue to evaluate the recommendations and consider new and different circumstances. So I do see it as an evolving committee and program.
So shall we leave it as review and implement as appropriate the recommendations of the report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force?
I would.
I like it.
Okay.
I think my only problem, this is my same problem with the capital language, which I'll revisit when we get there, is that we don't really know what this is yet. And we're pulling it into this financial policy that we're not updating for 3 years. So I mean, if the majority is fine with keeping it in there, I'm fine with it as well, but I totally get the point that you're making.
Yeah,
I think the
right.
as appropriate language gives you a lot of leeway though.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
There was a mispositioning of language in 21. In the third to the last line, there should be a period after tax increases. And the next sentence should read, therefore, consideration and careful study should be given to the financial management tools and options to ensure an operational override is the optimal solution. I just wanted to point that out to people. I think
I'm at a point. Oh, I'm sorry, keep going. You're not there yet.
Oh, you want to one on capital assets? Yeah. This, I think, basically was some wordsmithing that Liza suggested, which makes sense to me. And so I would accept her proposed language. Everybody okay with that on one?
I agree.
I agree as well.
Paragraph 2 is the old paragraph, either 13 or 14. You'll see that 2 is the same. 2 as it is added is the same language that appeared later on. And it's just a change to emphasize priority of financial planning.
Oh, I like that.
And I'm fine with that too.
Okay with me.
Okay, everyone?
Yeah.
Then we were asked last night if we had specific examples of what kinds of assets would be affected by changing 10,000 to 15,000. I didn't have that, but I did reach out to Eric Valentine today and to our AdCom liaisons, Daveline and Matt. So I don't know, and we'll get input from the select board tonight. The 10,000 has been in there for a long time. It seemed to George, Caitlin, and myself, it was an appropriate time to raise the amount. And I suppose the number 15,000 is somewhat arbitrary.
I think that second part of it, or otherwise classified as fixed assets, I could be wrong, but there's a number of items that the capital would approve that were under 10 that were either meet other criteria. And I'm kind of like looking through the last year's now, and I always thought it was an or statement, like they were either fixed assets or they have an economic life of, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the dollar amount doesn't matter in practical terms. Dallin, is that how you remember it? I don't ever remember us saying like, oh, it's not 10,000.
Yeah, and the same thing is we have occasionally looked at something that was less than 5,000, which is the next one. So.
So do you have an understanding? Because I think that the concern is that when we increase it from 10 to 5, then anything, some of that expense goes over to their budgets versus being capital. And I thought when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, you said that there weren't that many under that threshold.
Well, anything for fixed assets, anything $5,000 or over was considered capital outlay. If you make it a lot, if you raise the amount, which I don't have a problem with, the only problem I have is if we level fund 1 year and say it's the treasurer collector, they get a mailing machine every 5 or 6 years. They're $6,000 a piece. If they needed one in FY23 and FY23 was level funded from FY22, they wouldn't be able to absorb that $6,000 in their budget to get that mailing machine. So it's just a question of whether or not 5,000, 10,000, or 15 is appropriate. I know the auditors have told us that 5,000 is rather low in the scheme of fixed assets. So whichever way you do it, it's fine with me.
Julie reminded me.
Somebody doesn't agree with it.
Yeah, but something not okay with the dog, apparently.
Snickers is mad.
No, someone moved. He doesn't like that.
Bob, I think when we looked at the Kennedy School capital study,
yes,
we are an outlier with such a low amount. You know, everybody else was at 10 or 15,000. So.
Yeah, so this is just making implementing some of the recommendations that they made in their report to us in 2020. So.
And I think in reality, and Matt, you might remember this better than I do, but when we're actually funding things, we fund very few things that would be at these dollar amounts. Because it seems like virtually everything that comes in, you know, if you're talking about a vehicle, it's way more than this. I mean, I think the $5,000 might have been the water bubbler filler things, but, or the bricks for out front, but almost out in the memorial area. But almost everything else is over those amounts. There might be a couple.
Can I just make a suggestion given Sue's point? Because I thought Sue's point was really interesting. I don't have a concern about where this number goes. I'm happy to defer to the auditors and people, but might it be worthwhile to put some kind of parenthetical or a little escape valve to permit someone in the interim, or do we do it 7,500 and then 10,000? I don't know. I just don't want to create a problem where there isn't one by, inadvertently raising something that ends up becoming forced into the operating budget then because it's $9,500 or 14,500 over some period of time. I imagine people are making budgets right now, and if we move this goalpost, does that change how someone would categorize something? I don't know. I just would hate to have an unintended consequence.
You probably run into that no matter what number you pick.
Yeah.
That's why I was suggesting maybe in the policy over the next 3 years, we say, subject to, approval from your department head or whatever, just to give someone a chance to go and get that, thing. I don't know. Like I said, maybe I'm creating a problem where there isn't one. So I don't intend to do that.
Well, why don't we see what feedback we get from Capital and from the selectmen, and we can update people on that feedback and see where we end up.
Yeah, Capital Outlay will meet December 6th. It's the schedule.
Bob, I know Liza didn't bring this up, and maybe shouldn't be throwing a monkey wrench into this thing, but capital assets are supposed to have a life of 5 years. And one of the issues that the school committee has brought up repeatedly is that their annual expense for technology licenses and that sort of and upgrades have to go through capital, and they don't have a 5-year lifespan. So, is this, should we make some attempt to deal with that here or not?
That may be an issue for the Capital Outlay Committee.
I was going to say, I think, and Matt, you might remember this differently. I think we've heard from the school people when they've come before Capital that they have talked about moving that I think it's $100,000 to their operating budget. There's been some discussion of that.
I thought the replacement rate was exactly 20%, and so it was 5 years. It's every 5 years they were turning over that computer stock.
But isn't it
it's also like the asset itself doesn't have an economic life beyond our ownership of it. Yes, like in many of these cases, I believe we sell these things or we sell them back or whatever. It might be done for our economic life, but it still has value at the end.
Well, I'd say that we report back after we get further feedback.
Okay.
And the language in 9, Liza thought that was somewhat confusing and that it would be clarified, for example, if we differentiated between maintenance that is going to substantially increase the life of a building or a piece of equipment such as a new engine for a truck or a new roof for a building might make this more understandable. And I had no problem with that. I don't know if anybody has any feelings one way or the other about it.
I think it makes sense.
Okay, are we all okay with that?
Let me just ask a question as to how hard is it to draw this line?
like so many things in this financial policy, there are going to be matters of degree. And I suppose that is going to have to be slugged out in the budget trenches. I mean, if somebody's coming in saying, you know, we want to do this repair that's going to increase the life of this asset for 1 year, maybe that's something that ought to be addressed in the department's budget rather than as a capital expenditure. But I think, you know, the example provides a general principle for analysis, but it doesn't permit drawing fine lines. So I don't have any problem with the general principle. Okay. I think Liza's change to 10 was just a little bit of tweaking of the language. I didn't have any problem with that.
I thought in 12, it was ironic that Liza of all people missed Board of Selectmen.
Well, we missed it too.
I know, but
Oh.
that'll let go. Liza?
I would suggest that in 11 you spell out SSCC as and not use the abbreviation.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had abbreviated it earlier or not, but happy to spell it out.
Bob, can we stop on 13?
Sure, we had no comments on that last night.
Except mine, but yeah, so I took some time since the last meeting. I know we talked about this at the last meeting to do some additional research to articulate my points a little bit better. And I just wanted to share it back with the committee as to why I think we shouldn't be going forward with this language at this time for the policy. So when I went and looked back at the warrant articles, and I want to just ask everybody to think about this objectively as it relates to the financial policy. So I went back and looked at the articles 13 and 14 that were approved in 2021. And the two things that, in my opinion, that we approved were establishing a climate planning action committee and creating a climate action plan that would evaluate a wide range of carbon emission reduction strategies and propose measures within the town of Hingham to achieve zero sum of carbon emissions produced, et cetera. And so when I think about the warrant article and what we've approved as a town to date, it's the creation of a climate action plan, not the actual plan yet, right? So that, to my knowledge, in terms, as I said on the Capital Planning Action Committee meeting, they're in the process of creating that. But I don't think it doesn't appear that that's going to be done before town meeting. And once it's created, it still needs to be socialized through town boards, committees, approved by the select board, and potentially town meeting, depending on the proposal. And that's kind of my understanding from talking to Bob and Julie. And so I just have some general kind of concerns with having this language in at this time. So overarching my concerns is that we haven't approved a climate action plan. Reference to that it doesn't, and so we don't have a plan. And to me, like, not having a plan as reference just doesn't seem to be as best practice as it relates to a financial policy. And the level of directive and specificity is inconsistent with the rest of the financial policy, in my opinion. And my specific concerns with the language is when you're reading it, as I talked about, like when we talk about should reflect the town's commitment, I guess I just don't fully understand what the town commitment is without that climate action plan. And then when we talk about implementing a reduction, like of approaches, again, without a plan, what are those approaches that we're trying to implement? And the article even references a wide range of strategies. I feel that without guidelines for various town departments to reference, I feel like it's going to cause confusion and will potentially have town departments investing in capital that isn't actually aligned with the final approved plan. And then the last thing that I have concern about is we're saying wherever reasonable and possible, but there's no like definition, like what is reasonable and possible. And just think about the conversations, like case in point of what we've been having today on one word. With this language in the policy, I just don't think it's the appropriate time until we have a climate action plan that we refer to, you know, where we should be reflecting our commitment to it in the capital expenditures. And so this is the last time I'll bring it up, but I needed to get it out there and actually be more articulate in my point than I was last time.
Can I just comment that in the tour some of us took yesterday of the town facilities, when we viewed the location of the public safety facility, Tom Mayo, we had a brief discussion of carbon emissions, and Tom allowed us how that building will not be a net zero building when it's constructed. And I believe, and check me if I'm wrong, Dave Aline, that he said it would be prohibitively expensive at this stage to build a net zero carbon emission building as that facility. So if this language produces some debate on whether the capital expenditures necessary to build a public school safety facility shouldn't be expended because they don't meet this, don't reflect the town's commitment to net zero carbon emissions, that's a potential problem.
I didn't quite hear him say it that way. What I heard him say is the building itself would not be net zero, but with the energy credits that Hingham Municipal Light would be buying, it would be a carbon neutral impact ultimately. So.
Okay, I'll take that, but it's not a net zero carbon emission building.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also think there was yesterday a lot of discussion on those tours. I don't know who's left to do the tours, but of the a lot of discussion about the future of ambulances and fire trucks and that building being set up in such a way as it will be able to have sufficient charging stations and things like that. So I don't know, you know, in terms of the town's commitment, it seems to me there is clearly a commitment to being more green. I guess that's what I'll say.
And I completely agree with that. And again, I'm on board with that. I'm just saying when I'm thinking about it, if I were not on this committee and just looking at this policy and I approved the town creating a plan as part of, you know, town meeting last year, but I don't really know what that plan is as a member of the community and what that means from a financial standpoint. And so I just think we're putting the cart before the horse with this language at this time.
Evan?
Yeah, so I actually would agree with Caitlin's point, but you know, I think if you take a look at the policy, we review the policy every 3 years. I think we do need to be a little bit forward-looking. So is there language, and I agree, by the way, we don't have a commitment to net zero carbon emissions yet because we don't have a plan that states that. But could we say something to the effect of, you know, capital expenditures should be in line with the town's future commitment to, you know, to a path to net zero carbon or something, you know, in other words, it allows us to kind of adopt whatever the recommendation of the committee comes out with. And there's a little bit, so it doesn't look like we ignored it, right? It is
almost
very
how
much
we approach the sustainable budget task force line item, that we are kind of dependent on that plan. We would support it as appropriate to this financial policy.
correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Is that like a middle ground? Because I don't like the idea of dropping it all together just because it seems like we're dropping it for a technicality, although I completely agree with the technicality. I think, you know, for us to be in line with where the town moves based on what comes out of the committee and the plan, you know, we should be a little bit forward thinking on that, because it is going to have an impact on how we look at budgets over the next few years.
And I think to your point, Evan, you almost take capital expenditures out of there, right? Because to me, it could affect our operating and our capital budgets. And so it should almost just be more like the sustainable budget one.
Yeah, it's too specific on something we haven't yet decided as it's written.
Brenda? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Julie.
My understanding of the warrant article was that the goal of reaching net zero emissions by a certain date was the commitment of that warrant article. How exactly we would get there was what the plan was to define, but the goal was pretty clearly stated, and I think was committed to by town meeting. So having the language say, you know, the town will be working to reduce carbon emissions, I think that's pretty straightforward from last year's warrant article. The exact method, I understand, is not in any way defined yet. But anyway, I think that was the warrant article was, this is what we are committing to doing. How we're going to get there, we're not sure yet, but the commitment's there.
Dave.
So I just wanted to say why I think this is part of capital. And I know in listening to a recent select board meeting, they were asking before they did a contract, before they approved a contract, whether or not the department head had in fact explored greener versions of vehicles, electric vehicles, et cetera. In capital is where we're going to often be confronting the technologies that, you know, we spend a lot of time on vehicles of a variety of numbers. And so I think this does belong in the capital part of the financial plan, because it guides our capital outlay committee as to what we should be looking for from the department heads, so that when they come, you know, just like the police chief said yesterday on the tour, that the hybrid vehicles are working so great, that the officers love them. They don't have to fill up as often, all those things. So I think it's a directive in that sense to the capital outlay committee. So I think that's totally appropriate.
Yeah, I always see this as an indication to town departments in capital planning that they should look to the implementation of carbon reduction approaches whenever reasonable and possible. And that doesn't really tie their hands in any way. And I would expect that any AdCom liaison to capital expenditure or budgets is going to be asking questions about the green impact of the expenditures. I mean, most of our budget is personnel, but I don't see that this language does any harm whatsoever, and it could only do good. And I mean, the flip side of saying, well, we need a capital plan before we can make capital expenditures is that, well, if you make capital expenditures that are not green at all and don't comport with any appropriate green capital plan, you're in a worse position, I think, because you may have to re-spend money that might otherwise be well spent if carbon neutral principles were taken into account when reasonable and possible.
I just don't know if I owned a town budget, how I would use this in the time being until we actually had a climate action plan to approach the capital planning outlay committee on what I was going to do. So I think we still get there if we raise it up a level and it's more consistent with the, you know, the rest of the policy, if it's around upon creation of a climate action plan, because within that there would be actually specific instructions in terms of, or more specificity around what we actually mean in terms of, you know, types of vehicles, for example, or.
I don't think that's our job. I think that's the job of people that are doing things like planning the public safety facility. You know, they're looking into how green they can make it. Yes, they have to use diesel for their backup generators, and they need to regenerate their power in a certain way that isn't feasible in a green way now. But at least they're asking the questions and moving forward. And I think that's all this language does.
I feel like we're trying to govern through this clause versus actually going through the climate action plan. But that's the last thing I'm going to say about it here.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing. I don't disagree with the intent, right? I know what we're trying. I think I understand what we're trying to do, but it did cause me to pause and think, as a guiding principle and as a, you know, kind of the role that the advisory committee plays and its relationship to our financial policy, would we want to go a click above this and not make it so specific, but have it be a guiding principle? Because, you know, many things that we look at are going to need to take net, you know, carbon emissions and sustainability overall into you know, consideration as we look at the large things that come before us, and they're not just for capital. I'll end there because it just made me think, is there another place where we could add something that says this body kind of agrees that we should, you know, be reflective of, you know, climate and sustainability issues as we look at the budgets overall, not just capital outlay.
Well, at some point we need to move forward.
Yep.
Julie, I don't know if you want to take a straw vote on how many people want to keep this language in as opposed to no language at all, as opposed to some alternate formulation to be proposed by those who are suggesting one.
Would changing commitment to goal help you much, Caitlin? The only reason I say that,
I'm on mute. Bob, where's your mug?
The comment to Article 14 included the statement, Article 14 is still necessary for two reasons. First, a vote by town meeting is necessary to affirm the development of a cap for the town, including the goal of net zero carbon emissions by the targeted date. So that the vote anticipated that the climate action plan would reflect the goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2040. Now, of course,
yeah,
or some other target deemed feasible. So I wouldn't put a date in there, but
I think it fits the best in the almost the upfront paragraph where it's like we have our, to Evan's point, our guiding principles as it relates to like what kind of town we want to live in and the affordability. I'm forgetting all the specifics, but to me, it's an overarching one. Our commitment to the climate change committee and all the objectives there is more overarching. And then maybe you specifically say, especially as it relates to capital expenditures. But I would put it up a level and move it up to the top section.
Dave?
I was just going to suggest, forgetting where to place it exactly, what if we, to Brenda's point, what if we put the word achieve in the first line, so it would read capital expenditure should reflect the town's commitment to achieving net zero carbon emissions? Because it strikes me that that's, I mean, at least one of the problems I had with the language, which I got a sense of from Caitlin's comment, was that the question of net, is this got to be net zero, or are we working towards it? I also kind of think if we think this is important, I tend to agree with putting it up front, but I guess I'm not going to, it's not quite sure it's the hill I'm going to die on, but.
Me either. And I don't mean to derail the conversation. It just did get me, cause me to pause.
No, I think it's a good point. I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, like right up here.
Daveline?
I was just going to say it might be interesting to hear the select board's comments on this tonight. So that may affect, actually, we may get some feedback there that would be impactful.
That's a good point.
Because it's clear their office and the town administrator are in fact pushing people towards considering greening and net zero. So,
yeah.
Tina?
I do agree with Caitlin's points that I think it makes sense to up-click the language. And I would not mind at all putting it in the front of the document because I believe it's a tremendously important goal for the town. And I think it should be up front.
All right, so Bob, maybe you can present to the select board the alternative of keeping it within capital outlay, the sentence that we have, or maybe a rewording of that sentence a little bit, or move it to the principles at the beginning of the financial policy. How about that?
So it would be a last bullet point on the after operating budget.
Where we would have the purpose of this document is to establish policies for managing expenditures to. Is that where you'd want it, Caitlin, as the sixth bullet point?
Yeah, I think if it's better up here because to me you can. It's beyond just whether capital expense is where the majority of it is. It flows throughout everything we do, and it should be in line with an approved climate action plan. So yes.
Okay, let me get the input from the select board then, and I can report back to everyone.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, and Caitlin, thank you for speaking up.
On the next page on 4, I guess it is. Liza wanted to delete the word only.
I don't think the sentence means anything if you delete only and put in when. The objective of debt management is to borrow funds when they're needed.
Yeah, I think the only makes sense.
Yeah.
I agree.
So we'll leave that in.
I would.
Yes.
Okay. And this may be a question for you, Sue. But reading this over last night, in 9, I saw the phrase capital exclusion. And I said to myself, what the heck is a capital exclusion? Are we really talking about what we usually refer to as a debt exclusion?
I believe so, yes.
And then I went to the Division of Local Services glossary of municipal finance terms, and they have the term capital outlay expenditure exclusion, which is not a term I think we've ever used in the town of Hingham. So does it make sense to just change debt capital exclusion to debt exclusion? What do you think?
I think so. I agree.
I would think so too.
Okay. Everyone else okay with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think
What in that same paragraph, what does the addition of or to offset expenses when a capital debt exclusion is proposed? What does that mean in that sense?
yeah, that's what we're coming to next.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were
And that was Liza's suggestion again. And And what she was saying is, for example, if you're making an investment in solar panels on the high school roof, it costs so much, but it is also going to provide a substantial offset in terms of the energy expense of running the high school.
Why don't we just call it the overall net increase in property taxes and not use her addition?
I agree.
That would make more sense to me.
Okay. With the idea that the word net includes that concept.
Yeah, I think you would, that would be the implication, yeah, without.
Okay. All right, and I think, unless anybody has anything else that is on their minds about the financial policy changes.
Bob, I had one more question. It's like section 3 in the first section at the top. It was just something I caught, and I think we might have it wrong, but it's number 3. Section 3 in financial. Okay. So where we say the town's real estate tax revenues are restricted to 2.5% annual growth rate absent an override. Okay, actually, maybe this is just my misunderstanding, because when I think about like taxes, there's, okay, I'll just say this, but if it's like a misunderstanding of me, just tell me to, we'll talk about it later, but like there's 2 things related to the tax revenue, right? It's the tax rate, and then it's the value of the properties. So is there a time when taxes actually increase like greater than the 2.5% because people's property values are going up?
No.
Okay, so 2.5%.
It's often misunderstood in the town that people think that because their property values are going up, that their taxes are going to increase commensurately, but it really is it's the overall tax levy that can increase 2.5% each fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Then I'm good.
Okay, Sue, I think you can tell the selectmen that the select board that if they're ready for us at any point, we can sign in.
I just texted Michelle, so I will let you know if she texts me back.
Okay.
Tell them to get some more coffee too while they're at
it. Well, I am going to tell them that it took us almost an hour and a half, and we didn't even address all the changes we discussed before.
Hey, you kind of snuck those right by us, Robert. Good work.
I didn't want.
Well, we already talked about those. We talked about those in October. So.
Exactly.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, George. Thanks, Caitlin. This is great. And next to the select board, and then to the capital outlay, and then hopefully it finds our way back to us, the financial policy, to be able to vote on it on our meeting on December 7th, or worst case scenario on the 14th.
Can't wait.
Okay, so next on our agenda, we're going to head back to our in order. And so we're going to look at minutes for Nancy from the October 12th meeting.
I distributed a new version this afternoon, so hopefully you're looking at it's got a version 2 at the end. And there was just some minor changes. The only substantive change was that I had mischaracterized in paragraph 5 the financial policy. We won't beat it again tonight on this one, but so I changed the paragraph here to reflect Caitlin's concern about the language.
I just make, I just have one quick comment, Nancy. The very bottom of page 1, and I am loath to speak for Julie on this, but I certainly didn't think Julie was suggesting a dangerous financial policy with that question. I mean, the question I thought Julie asked, which is kind of the same one I asked, was related to, you know, is the AAA rating keeping us from doing certain things that we might otherwise do? So I don't know. I guess I don't remember Tom saying that would be considered a dangerous financial policy, but I just didn't want to.
He did say, I mean, that was actually a direct, that was in both sets of notes, was that he did say that, I mean, I can remove it if it's not consequential, but it's, that what Tom's point was we wouldn't do anything. I don't think he was saying that Julie was saying we would do something. He was saying the town would never do anything that was outside of, and doing projects that took us outside the bounds of AAA would be bad financial a dangerous financial policy. He did use the word dangerous though, but I can remove it if you feel it's too strong.
Well, I'm okay if that's what he said. I don't remember him saying that, but remind me again, so that what my understanding was, the question was, well, Julie, you tell me what your question was. I thought your question was, are we not doing anything? In other words, in an effort to keep AAA, are there any projects that we aren't undertaking?
Right, and it was a badly, I don't know, however I said it, it didn't even come out quite right. So I can understand the confusion that it was just like, not really because a great question. But.
Forgive me, because you and I thought that we're thinking along the same lines. Because let's just take an example that we were very close to a AA, AAA, and someone wants to put in a $50 million pool, and we say, well, we can't do that for a variety of reasons, but we also know that doing so would trigger, you know, would put us in negative credit watch. Maybe we go down to AAA. I mean, that it doesn't strike me as dangerous financial policy to not do a project if you thought that, well, I don't want to, we don't have to now speak for, I'm not going to speak for Tom. He's not here to defend himself. So if no one else has a problem with it, we can keep it. It just struck me as dangerous financial policy. I'm not sure I've ever seen those words in our minutes. And I
can take out that last and just say, leave it as Tom, Mr. Mayor replied no.
Right. I think that's the solution.
Good.
It's a little bit more salacious, leaving the dangerous financial policy in, but.
Yeah, I think it's just
mentioning. There it goes again.
Okay. All right, good.
Thank you, Caitlin.
All right, next on the agenda is another discussion about some important, the Advisory Committee Handbook. We're finally here, and so I wanted to thank Brenda and Tina for taking on our annual task of updating the Advisory Committee Handbook. And just to give you a quick background, the handbook was first created in 2010, and it has 7 parts of it. Notably, part 6 of the entire Advisory Committee Handbook is the financial policy. So AdCom updates our handbook every year, but it's only part 6. The financial policy is what gets updated every 3 years. So last year, AdCom only updated part 5, which is our Advisory Committee rules. So for this year, Brenda and Tina have undertaken the review of all parts of the handbook, except obviously the financial policy, which Bob and team have taken care of. And areas in particular that have needed some updating are how we made a change to the Advisory Committee bylaw at annual town meeting 2021, making language throughout the document gender neutral, updating the town's organizational chart to reflect changes such as the addition of a second assistant town administrator and the water company acquisition, and this year's current committee roster and town meeting dates. And before I hand this over to Brenda and Tina, I do want to just also stress that I know that last year when we updated the rules, there was a lot of care to the style of the document. And I think the intent for this year is to update the substantive parts and not necessarily spend a lot of time rewriting the style of the document. Obviously, we want to be consistent or try to be consistent throughout, but I'm not interested in doing a total rewrite of past advisory committees' work. It's sort of a funny thing because it gets updated every year, right? So we have to sort of update the substance, but not exactly update every word. So hopefully that makes sense. So you want to take it away, Brenda and Tina?
Okay. I received 3 comments that were substantive, I think, that I appreciate people's input on. Andy also offered quite a few sort of style and wordsmithing kind of comments, which I think I have not mastered them all yet, Andy. I had a quick chance to read it before I came tonight. But in terms of specifics, if you would turn to page 16, Andy asks whether in the 3rd paragraph, the capital outlay process, whether the statement should be, he says, I assume that the remaining 4 years of the 5-year capital plan should reflect the assessments of both the capital outlay committee and the department head. So he suggests adding capital outlay committee to that paragraph, page 16, 3rd paragraph.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, Andy, can you clarify?
Under 723.
I know where we are. I'm just trying to get to the substance.
All right. However, the remaining 4 years of the plan should also reflect the department's current best estimate of necessary capital needs. And since the capital outlay committee gets involved in the 5-year capital plan, shouldn't the remaining 4 years of the plan also reflect the capital outlay committee's best assessment?
It doesn't. It is the department presents what they think they will need each year, and that's accepted and then reviewed as you go on. So it's not, the capital outlay committee isn't really making a judgment about the future capital needs. They're asking the department heads to do that.
Okay, then I guess I'm not sure. Let me just read this. Capital Outlay Committee evaluates departmental proposals and incorporates those which it considers most necessary into a recommended 5-year capital plan, which focuses particularly on the upcoming fiscal year. So doesn't the Capital Outlay Committee recommend the 5-year capital plan?
Yes, but there's not a lot of, there really isn't. I don't know, Matt, you might want to comment. There's not really a lot of judgment about what, say, the department thinks their needs will be in 3 years. That's not really discussed so much by the Capital Outlay Committee, other than to sort of see what's on the horizon, which may or may not be approved in those future years. The judgment is only, the recommendation is only about the current year.
The remaining 4 years of the plan should also reflect the department's current best assessment of necessary capital needs.
Right, it's the department's assessment of what their needs will be.
Okay, okay. Then I guess the change I suggested, Brenda, would not be appropriate.
Okay, and Tina, that same paragraph, we missed one of the Board of Selectmen switches to select board. So
we didn't miss it, which is what's funny. Okay. I don't know why it didn't get.
It got lost somewhere along the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, so moving on to page 20. The first bullet. Bob asks whether we should add to that first bullet that if the article involves a real estate transaction of any type, that the consultation with the town's real estate council be added.
I had a similar recommendation, so I agree. I think what I said was should be consultation with the real estate council for the town, who presumably has all these documents.
Any
I'm fine with that.
Any concerns about adding that, or is there agreement?
Sounds good.
All right.
That's why we have a real estate council.
Right. And the other comment that came in was from Kristen, pointing out that on page 23, where we have the town meeting process schedule, that we updated the dates except for the date when the warrant is sent to the citizens, and that should be April of 2022. So.
Amazing how time goes by. You see these numbers and I don't know.
So I had a question on page 22, and maybe I just totally missed this in my 3 years, but on the, after the bubble lines, the second paragraph, the final order of the articles, isn't that determined by the moderator?
Yeah.
And not the chair of the Board of Selectmen?
Okay.
Have I just missed that? I thought the moderator determines the order and numbers.
I think you're right.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
As opposed to the chair of the select board.
I agree.
Yeah, we can check that pretty easily, right?
Right.
I tried to check it today, and there's nowhere where one could find an answer to the question.
Well, I mean, by just asking the moderator.
But what I recall is the moderator is the one who's done it when we have sent him the articles. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just worth Brenda and Tina just following up with the moderator to double check the validity of that.
Okay, all right. Okay. So other comments or suggestions?
Excellent job. Thank you.
Yes, thank
you. You'll go over mine, Brenda, I hope.
Yep, we will. Definitely we were planning to do things like check the size of the font, et cetera, throughout the whole document. But until we got the last pieces back, the organizational chart as well as the financial policy, that seemed worth waiting for the next revision. So.
Okay.
And Andy, the entire Article 3.1, Article 14, Part 1 and 2, where you made all the changes, I did the same thing. That's all directly from the warrant, so we can't change the language.
I'm sorry, I'm not, where are you?
Article, so section 3.2, Article 14, Part
pages
1.
4 and 5. Pages 4 and 5.
Sorry, thanks, Brenda.
Pages what?
That language we can't change. That is the bylaw that was voted at town meeting. So whether we like the language or not, we got to keep it.
I changed it twice on poor Brenda before I finally figured that out.
So section 3 of the handbook is just restating what it, and so that we can see it in our handbook, what the bylaw is. And Bob did a great job last year of doing an update to our bylaw to make sure that George didn't get paid for being secretary. You know, really hard-hitting changes. Then there's also the second part that there was another bylaw change at town meeting last year, and that was to make the language throughout all of the bylaws gender neutral. And that is something that town meeting approved. Then there's a process of making those changes to the bylaws. And thanks to Daveline, she was instrumental in going through our bylaws and making those changes. But now the select board actually have to take a final vote on those changes. And that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. And once they make that change, then Brenda and Tina can go in and make that change to the bylaw, section 3.0 of our handbook, and then we can approve it, the whole thing.
And to fess up, we've actually already put in Daveline's language for section 3. So
okay.
If the select board don't approve it, again, I think there were 2 places where select board was changed. I mean, for this bylaw, it was relatively minor.
Right. And so because of that, we're waiting on the select board for that. And also we're waiting on the select board for an updated organizational chart for the town, which would include the addition of the assistant town administrator, the second assistant town administrator. So anyway, That's why we're discussing tonight, but we are not voting on these handbook changes. George, you had something?
Yeah, and this may be a result of my spending yesterday afternoon in Andy's company that I'm getting a little too picky here, but in the first
me.
picky? Well, you may appreciate it, Andy, but in the first section, last year, we, as you all know, we spent a lot of time on this thing, but we came up with certain language to describe posting of our meetings and that they would be in compliance with open meeting laws and MGL, And just for the sake of consistency, I think when we get down to our operating rules and we talk about having our meetings posted, that I'd suggest that we just bring that exact same language down.
We did.
Which section is that, George, or what page?
I want to say maybe section 10. I don't have the document open now.
Yeah, I did think we had done that.
But we will go back and double check that.
Okay.
I asked Brenda the question on the last page, which I think this is 24. It says that the telephone messages left for the committee and emails sent to our published email address are fielded by the committee's administrative assistant and distributed to the full committee. And my question to Brenda was, who is our administrative assistant?
Yeah,
Sue Nickerson.
Yeah.
Who?
Do you remember all those emails we get from Sue with emails from people who contacted the committee?
I just thought that that was a kind of a high-priced administrative assistant where we have there.
Oh, I love doing it for you, Andy.
Thank you, Sue.
There's been more shade on this call than I've ever seen.
Other comments?
Actually, I had one more, Brenda. When I was looking in section 7, it doesn't, like, in terms of our main responsibilities, it doesn't mention updating the financial policy, and I don't know if it fits in there or not, but it just pops me when I was reviewing it the other day.
So section 7.
Section 7, it's like that upfront section where it talks about, you know, we're apprised of the activities of town departments, and there's 4 bullets, there's 4 main responsibilities. So it's a take or leave. When I was looking at it, it popped, obviously, because I'm so ingrained in the financial policy right now.
Doing that, yep. Yeah. I think we proposed the changes, but they go to the select board then, right? So I don't know, is it our piece of work, or is it sort of something we oversee like other things? How would you characterize it?
On page 16.
Andy, hold on a second. Let me just see if we can get some feedback about other.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Adding to the advisory committee workflow, a 5th bullet point with recommending reviewing and making recommended changes to the town's financial policy. Does that belong there?
Yeah, so you could also put in there, it's our job to update our handbook every year. Anyone?
Other
page 6.
Wait a minute, hold on. Does anyone have any other feedback about stating overtly that our responsibility and the advisory committee, one of our responsibilities is to update the financial policy every 3 years?
Well, it is job policy. You guys vote on it. So yeah, I would say that is one of your main duties.
All
yeah.
Right.
So thank you. Okay.
But we do talk about updating the handbook in the front of the document under 2.0 document objectives.
Good. All right. Leave it there. Yep.
Okay, so we will add that. All right. So Andy, what was your next thing?
On page 16, there's a reference to, this is in section 7.2.4. There's a reference to department benchmarking data. Now, and I was curious as to what that meant.
This is old language from former advisory committees. Does anyone know?
I think that's just looking at our comparable benchmark towns and other benchmark data, even across, I mean, the fire stations and the police stations use benchmark data. We use benchmark towns. It's sort of a comparison figure. Not too general?
Well, you walked into it because now we're going to get the Andy lecture on benchmark communities.
I'm muting now. I'm on a lot of medication. I'm just going to.
Sorry, I joke. Go ahead, Andy.
Is that, if that's what it means, then everybody knows my response to that. So.
Can we just hear it one more time though?
No, you don't want to hear it again.
See, sometimes, Andy, sometimes you create something and it takes on a life of its own, even though never intended to do so.
But yeah, but the word benchmark is a dramatic misnomer.
Oh, oh no, he got the sign out.
and a trigger for Andy.
Indeed it is.
So the question though at hand is that sentence necessary, useful, informative? Or do we think that our town departments do that already?
The reality is we always keep getting asked about it because it has become part of the nomenclature or something, even if it was not so intended.
I think I'll have to create what I would consider to be a list of comparable towns that we could consider in all of these areas that would be different from what the list that is currently used by the personnel board and been adopted by others. So having said that, I'll move on.
I have to say, I actually 100% agree with you on that. And I do think it's a term that's taken on a life of its own and can be manipulated for its own purposes. So I don't see why you couldn't just delete that entire sentence, because everyone's going to do what they want to determine their own priorities and use the data that they want. But do we need to recommend it in our handbook in this general way? I've stepped into it again. Okay, I'm
thinking, I don't know anyone who's going to read this and say, oh shoot, then now we're not going to do benchmarking. But
I mean, for God's sake, I haven't even read it.
Evan, I don't know. Anyone?
Keep, drop. What's the input?
Leave it in, and I'll come up with some a better list.
All right, fair enough. All right, thank you. Nina and I will incorporate. So,
well, thank you both, Brenda and Tina. This is and all of you. This is very dry work, but this is part of our job, and so we get through it. Big smile.
I think this is the best part of the year. Just kidding, Evan.
I'm getting your sense of sarcasm.
Okay, so now we're gonna hop to the next agenda item, which is a very exciting time where we get our liaison reports and find out what is going on around the various committees in town. So I'm going to start off with George and the Sustainable Budget Task Force.
All right, Julie, thank you. So Liz Klein did give a presentation to the select board on the 19th of October, and I think we sent those slides out to all of you. I listened to the select board meeting where she presented those, and you know, the task force got some accolades for doing a good and thorough job, and appreciation for the magnitude and the effort that's gone into it so far. Since that point, the committee continues to meet weekly, and I believe this evening they're giving their second update to the select board. They have started to move into the expense analysis. This past week, Michelle Monsegur gave a very good presentation on wage classification for the municipal employees. And I think that's something that at some point it would be worth it for for her to come to AdCom and give us that presentation, just so we understand a little bit more about how wages and classifications are determined, you know, throughout the town. Tomorrow, in tomorrow's meeting, we will see or we'll hear from the school side. So Liza O'Reilly will address the task force tomorrow, and also the outside attorney that they use in negotiating contracts will come and provide some input for that. And other than that, the committee continues to meet weekly and to plow through all of their information. So, any questions or comments at this point?
Isn't there a January deadline for a final report, George?
There is. End of January, they are due to present their report.
And does that look like that's going to be met?
I believe that will be met.
Is that date, George?
I'm sorry?
Was there a hard date? January?
I don't know that I've seen a hard date on it. It's just the end of January. And meanwhile, the school's strategic plan is underway. They've engaged an outside firm to coordinate and lead that effort, but that plan will not be finished until later this spring.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, George.
You're welcome.
So I kind of lumped together in one line, but we've got ACEs, and then, so maybe we could start with Dave if he has an ACEs update, and then maybe we could go to Evan or Al to give any kind of foster school building update.
Yeah, just quickly on the ACEs side, I've kind of lived vicariously through John Ferris's participation in the Sustainable Budget Committee. So if anybody was at the school committee meeting, and I did not yet get through the YouTube presentation of their school budget update, but I imagine that we're getting close to budget time for them to come up with the preliminary budget proposal. And I think if history is a yardstick, it will be last year's budget times about 1.04-ish, I think at a minimum, but that remains to be seen. So otherwise, as George pointed out, it continues to be unfortunately a scheduling mismatch with the budget process and the strategic planning process for the schools. It is what it is. I don't, you know, I think it's not a new problem. It's the nature of the beast. So unfortunately, we won't have the input from the strategic plan baked into this year's budget. But, you know, I think all of us wait with bated breath to see how the Sustainable Budget Task Force proposes we meet the needs this year. So that's really it from me on the ACES side, but I'd welcome anybody else on ACES who has more current information to jump in if they have it.
I don't have anything to add, Dave.
I don't either, Dave. You really stuck the landing on that one.
Foster School Building Committee.
Al, I'm happy to take it if you want.
Go for it. Thanks.
Okay. So they've been very busy. Linda shared an update with us because I had missed the last meeting, but got a nice kind of write up. And there's a meeting, I believe, tomorrow. But they have narrowed the site locations on the property down to 4 options. The educational plan has been fine-tuned, meaning they've taken a look at kind of the use for space and they've worked with Dr. Lavoie and Suzanne Vinnis to take a look at the needs they might have for kind of special education programming in the building, and kind of determine the total number of rooms or additional rooms they need to carry out the kind of curriculum. And the preliminary design plans were submitted to the MSBA this week, meaning last week, and they're working with the project managers to communications plan and design a website that the public can access to keep apprised of the team's activity. So they've been very, very busy, kind of narrowing it down. They've got to kind of connect with the Conservation Commission, which is the only thing I see as a potential snafu, but they've done a really admirable job, I say, moving this forward and trying to accelerate the timeline.
All right, thanks, Evan. Nancy, public safety facility.
They too have been.
Oh, wait, sorry, Nancy. George, were you raising your hand for a question for Evan?
No, I just, this may be old news, but you know, Bob and Caitlin and I, as Bob said earlier, gave our presentation with the school committee last night, and after that, Ray Estes addressed the school committee on the foster situation, and he did pretty much confirm that they will be coming before town meeting this April or May with a request for full funding for development and construction of foster, with the goal of opening in September of 24. So.
All right.
Thank you,
I like hearing the word like that town meeting might be like not April, but in May. And it's just sort of this sort of, okay, well, we'll see, but thank you. Nancy?
So the Public Safety Facility Building Committee is as busy as all the committees. They are also meeting weekly. They have worked through the schematic design estimates. They've had ongoing working group sessions with both chiefs to validate those designs. There's still some discussion about the HVAC system being heavily influenced by our friends from Net Zero and HMLP. So that's been a constant point of discussion. The next step is the design development report, and they're expecting that to take about 4 months. And they too expect to ask for money at town meeting. They're thinking it's going to be in April. Yeah, that's for you, Julie. But anyway, they right now they voted on and agreed to a 48,920 square foot facility. They worked with 2 cost estimators to get to the cost estimates, and they agreed upon what they eventually came to is just under $40 million. That's not the total project budget. That is for the construction costs, but it doesn't include the soft costs. It doesn't include a lot of the expenses, the site surveys, hazardous waste, that kind of thing. So that's not the final budget, but we're getting closer to that. So the final budget will come with the design development report once they know all the components of that. And I think that's it for what I have for, like I said, they're meeting weekly Thursday nights. You can catch them there.
And Nancy, sorry, but that 40 excludes the cost of the land too, right?
Correct. Yes. The land is a separate, but this all it is construction costs.
Right. Thanks.
Yep.
George, I don't know if you had your hand up still from the last.
It is, Julie. I'm sorry. I'm having difficulty lowering my hand. Okay. So just ignore me unless I wave at you or something.
Brenda.
Nancy, just wondering, can you update us on what their plan is for, Bob was talking about hearing that fueling of the emergency power source is going to be by diesel fuel. Do you know if they are planning to put solar panels on the roof, and if they've thought about battery storage as a source for that emergency power?
I don't know about battery store, what they landed on. I have not had an opportunity to watch the last meeting. So I don't know this if they came to any specifics on that. I do know that there was an increase in the size of the parking garage, and there is discussion of solar panels on top of that. And I also can't tell you the budget that came across that Mary sent out this week just had a single line item for HVAC. So and it's just under $3 million. So that could be anything. I don't know what they've come to on that. All of that, obviously ongoing conversations. And I think that there's still survey work to do to make those final decisions.
Yeah.
So I'm not, but I can't answer the diesel. I don't know, Brenda. I'll see if I can find out for you.
And the other issue is just that Hingham Light Plant already has battery storage installed for the solar panels they have on their property, and they're planning to use it to handle peak load things so as to not need to pay for dirtier power. But that's a pretty close distance to the new public facility building, so that might also be another source of a second source of battery storage power to handle that emergency load.
Yes, and there may be regulatory stuff that comes along with that as well, as to how long that they have to be able to sustain the building up and running without any electricity. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I know that that's all been under discussion. I just don't know what they've landed on.
And back in the days when my husband was designing public facility buildings, it was 72 hours that the building had to be able to power itself.
Yeah, and I know at one point, one of the consultants that was brought in did mention that basically the size of the building that would be needed to store whatever was needed for the battery was basically like building a whole nother parking garage onto the building. But I don't know whether how that's all been validated or what they came up with.
The light plant already has one, so that's the thing that
there you go.
We consider.
There you go. We'll use that. And I mean, Laura Burns has been at every meeting and has been very vocal about what the Hingham Light Plant and referencing back to conversations earlier tonight. So when we're talking about that building will probably not be in and of itself net zero, but because of the electricity supply be coming through the Hingham Light Plant as they become more green, that building and potentially Foster and any other new buildings that we build along the way or retrofit to this will become more green over time. So by just linking up to Hingham Light, we've put the onus on them to manage that for the whole town.
Thanks.
All right, Nancy. Now, Nancy, you get to tell us all about the Community Preservation Committee.
Yes, and CPC is well underway. For those of you that haven't directly watched CPC, it's a fast and furious process for how the money is determined to be spent. It's a very short cycle that they go through. So right now, they have already accepted the final final proposals from the proponents. There are actually 9. There's 11 line items now on kind of the score sheet. 9 of them are actual projects, and 2 of them are debt payments. So the Laner property and the Ben Lincoln house. We're still paying down debt payments on those. So the projects, as they did, the tours were completed at the end of last month. That's always one of my favorite days of the year. It's always kind of cool to see different parts of our town from that perspective. So there's the the projects that are going forward are the Habitat for Humanity on property on Whiting Street is going to have 2 buildings on it. The Housing Authority is putting forth 2 projects. One is at the Thaxter Street and the other is the Scotland Street property. That one's a building out envelope. The Thaxter Street is a fire door. Then there's the Affordable Trust Opportunity Fund, the Town Pool. Rec has 2 others on Cronin Field. One's the hockey court and one's the basketball court. And so those are the ones that we'll be seeing go forward. Just so you know, the presentations, if you're interested, they're tomorrow night on Zoom. And again, those are usually really interesting to see kind of what is being brought forward and you know, what kind of issues CPC can handle. Right now, there's 1.732 million in asks, and there is 1.283 million available to spend. So that's that available to spend. It doesn't include there's administrative fees that have to be paid, and the debt, there's a minimum debt payment that has to be paid on those 2 properties that we have. So there's about a $450,000 delta between the asks and what's available to spend. Any questions?
And would you describe it as Curb Your Enthusiasm meets Parks and Rec? Like watching one of these meetings?
No, that's the last meeting. The presentation. This one is just really the proponents of the you know, you've got town citizens who have a passion for specific things in town that don't necessarily fit into the other budget categories that we have. So it's just a different and to my eye, just an interesting view into the town that we don't necessarily see through the warrant or the budgets, the department budgets.
All right, thanks, Nancy. Al, you have South Shore Country Club?
There are 2 issues percolating their way towards warrant articles from the country club right now. The first that was mentioned is the town pool, which people may have seen on the, for those who took the tour, saw that property. It's not the $50 million proposal that Dave mentioned earlier. It was, it's only $7.5 million. The major issue with that is a couple of major issues. Again, one to clarify is that is town debt capacity and debt service supported by the town, which is, I'll distinguish with the second issue. Probably the major sort of decision point around the pool right now is, again, at a $7.5 million cost. That includes a $620,000 estimate of what it will make, what it will take to make that pool facility, quote, bubble ready, or make it a year-round pool so that there can be a bubble placed over it in the off season to be used as an indoor pool in the off season, and have that bubble taken down and utilized as an outdoor pool in the summer season. To just the physical construction of the system will cost $620,000 to make it bubble ready. And then there's an additional $500,000 cost subsequently to actually to purchase the bubble down the road. So that's probably the major decision point. Other costs that are in the mix there are the demolition of the existing pool, which is estimated to be at $400,000, notwithstanding anything they find fun when they dig into the old maintenance building underneath the pool. So those are the major issues with that. And so that's something that we'll be discussing probably down the road, is that notion of, is it worth to spend the $620,000 to make it bubble ready? while, because then when you assume the operating costs of making, there are essentially everyone who's been involved in looking at the budget for this believes that the operating costs can be supported at least at a break-even pace for the summer season. No one who has looked at it and the experience of other towns who have a similar facility estimate or presume that the facility will operate at a significant deficit on an operating cost basis to run year round. Particularly where there is not currently a sort of core anchor tenant to support it. Nancy, do you have a question on that?
Yeah, I just had a question on, you talked about the demolition of the old pool, but that's regardless of what happens with the new pool, right? I mean, that old pool just needs to come down.
It does. So it's sort of, yeah, is that, where does that get put in?
That it's not really tied into the current, the pool project. It's just another expense that the country club has.
It is. And I guess the question would be, because it's associated with this pool, does it ultimately get added on to that warrant article and that borrowing request? Or is it a response because it was the old country club facility? Is it part of the country club responsibility, which would, again, to the second warrant article they're working on, country club specific facilities? Because again, you think of this as the town pool. And so it's think of the town, this new one is the town pool. So therefore it is a town cost to be supported by town debt service, or is it a country club asset? Is the old pool a country club asset, which is supported by the enterprise fund? Right. I think is sort of what are the underlying issues to be discussed as the warrant article makes its way through. I guess I'm just
Sue has a
disagreement.
No, I don't. I apologize for interrupting. Bob, they're ready for you at the select board's meeting.
Okay, excuse us.
Your favorite topic. Sorry.
Good luck. Put your helmet on.
Be sure to come back. I'm sure we'll still be meeting when you're done. Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So that's the pool as it works its way through. And again, the important things to distinguish there are because it's viewed as the town pool, it's town debt capacity and town debt service and operating costs of the recreation department is how it's envisioned. The second issue is regarding the maintenance building, which people, if you've gone by, it's actually broken ground. They're doing the site work now for the new maintenance building. That was previously approved at $2.2 million, that whole project. The warrant article that's moving forward is a request for $600,000 of additional funding to support what I will loosely define as cost overruns or deficient cost estimates of some of it pandemic related, some of it weren't able to figure out cost engineering to reduce costs the way they hope to. And something that, again, as we dive into, I'll probably have to present specifically what did not work out the way it was planned. The important thing there, again, is that is viewed as a country club facilities specifically dedicated to the golf infrastructure. And so it would be town debt capacity, but the debt service supported by the town, by the enterprise fund, by the country club enterprise fund on an annual basis. Sarah.
Hi. I haven't, and I'll caveat, I haven't been on the tour yet, but the plans I remember seeing for the pool and where it goes, does that have an impact on the existing driving range chipping area? And if so, is that going to be another ask I thought they were maybe going to move the putting green over to where the maintenance facility is, and I didn't know if that was tied into that cost or that's a
no. What's been discussed, so the pool complex will go where the tennis courts are, and the tennis courts will be raised up a little bit.
They're not getting rid of them; they're just moving them.
The tennis courts will be removed.
Okay.
There will not be, the current plan at least is to not have tennis courts at Social Country Club. In looking at townwide sort of recreational facilities studies, I think there's a sense that we're good on tennis courts. There might be other deficiencies, but tennis courts.
I think they're in tough shape anyway.
And they're in tough shape. And so if we were, yes, yes, that's part of the decision as well. Is that if you were going, you can't just sort of slap some whatever that material is on top and just move on.
Yeah, it didn't work.
So the pool complex will go where the tennis courts are. There's no current plan to relocate tennis courts. There is with the removal of the current pool complex, there is envisioned to be a putting green place that part of the master plan, the current version of the master plan has a practice putting green where the pool is currently.
Right.
And with a longer term vision of renovating where the pro shop is to include a new pool pro shop and probably move the simulators behind there, and then a long-term discussion of what happens with the bowling alley.
Okay, but that's not in the warrant articles now.
That is not, right.
We're not
correct. That is not for now. That is, there's a concurrent master planning effort going on that we'll look at that issue. But that's the current discussion is that, and when you refer to will there be a putting green at the pool, that is a probable, that's a pretty well-baked part of that master plan, is that right there by the first tee where the pool is would be a practice, so sort of warm-up putting green. With no current, again, a longer-term master planning discussion. I spent 2 hours cleaning the driving range Saturday, but no current plan for the driving range.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Al.
All right.
Tina, you had cleaner, greener?
I have a remark and a question, so I feel like it's not really a liaison report because they're not marching, Cleaner, Greener, Hingham is not marching towards the warrant. But I thought it was interesting to remark that it's supposed to be an 8-member committee and they only currently have 4. So I did recommend that they reach out to the select board and the moderator for, talent bank people to fill out the rest of the committee. But I had a question because they're really interested in the newly proposed Better Bottle Bill, which will increase the return on bottles from 5 cents to 10 cents and also includes nip bottles, which I thought would be appealing for the garbage around town. But they asked, are they allowed to actively advocate in favor of that law? And I didn't know.
Well, that committee should have a person on staff that would give them advice that they could ask, or they can contact the town administrator's office to ask that information.
Yeah, I said to reach out about it, but I just thought it was an interesting question. I didn't know if committees, they have a charter and they're looking to, from town meeting, they're looking to create a handbook. But I just thought that was sort of an interesting question because I didn't know if they were allowed to actively advocate. And I told them to call town council, but I just thought it was an interesting question.
I know for the last updating the bottle bill attempt now 7 or 8 years ago, when I was then on long range waste planning, which is now Cleaner Greener, we understood that we could educate about what the bill would do, but couldn't necessarily promote it. But educating, absolutely.
Thanks. It's my whole report.
All right. Thanks, Tina. All right, Brenda, Climate Action Planning Committee.
They are tackling the work of how to put together a proposed climate action plan for the town, dividing themselves into working groups that will research different aspects of it and what's being done in other places, those kinds of things. The one piece that may come into our budget process this year is that Hingham Net Zero folks have approached the town administrator to say that it is time for the town to have a sustainability coordinator position, and asking him to put that into the town's budget this year. The Climate Action Planning Committee has been asked to whether or not they would support that. So they have a working group researching how other towns have brought sustainability coordinators on staff. One town in their town report said that they had gotten help from their local legislators in funding that position. So they're going to check out whether there's a source of funding for that position that exists at the state level. So anyway, so that's the one thing that may come sort of into our budget review process.
All right, that's very interesting. And Brenda, you also have Hingham Municipal Light Plant.
So the light plant does have 2 warrant articles that they expect to submit. The first is to transfer the chunk of land that's in the northeast corner of the transfer station property to the light plant for the placement of the 3rd distribution station. They did do, and the second would be having the town go out for the funding for the building of it, that the funds get repaid through the light plant customers. They had their first public meeting back in the middle of October by Zoom, attended by about 20 people, I think 10 of whom were residents. The others were the consultants that have been part of the planning process for the 3rd distribution center. In the questions that came up in that meeting, there were no concerns about the location of this proposed 3rd distribution area at the transfer station. So as compared to last year, that was not the concern. The questions that came up were much more about, isn't the town doing a lot of other big money projects? Isn't this a whole lot of money being spent? Are we sure we need it? Is there really a reliability issue? And is there really a need for increasing electric service to this town if there isn't a climate action plan in place yet that defines how much more we will need? So those are the types of questions that were coming up. They are holding their second public meeting this Thursday evening. I assume they will have tightened their presentation to attempt to answer those 2 questions. We'll see kind of how that plays out.
All right, thank you. Andy, you have planning board update?
Yes, the planning board has considered 2 and possibly 3 warrant articles, and will be meeting tomorrow night to discuss them. The first one concerns the floodplain protection overlay district maps. I was too busy driving nails through my hand to listen in great detail to that. So Sarah can report on that.
I thought they basically said we adopt it or we lose possibility for FEMA funding. So
that's exactly right. This
yeah.
is a no choice. Actually, there's a net benefit to the town in that under the proposed changes, 80 people or 80 properties come out of the floodplain and only 20 are added into it.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. It was, net positive news.
And the
depending on where you live.
That's right. If you're in the 80 or the 20.
Right.
The other article they're considering is revising their bylaw, the zoning bylaw, to make it general neutral and make some other slight language revisions. We haven't seen that yet, but we'll see. They have talked about consolidating the special permit process. Right now, Hingham has A1, A2, and A3 special permits, which makes us an outlier. Typically, there's only 1 special permit in the town. And there was some discussion as to why we have done that historically and what the purpose it serves. That has not been resolved. In line with that is consideration of the site plan review process and whether that can be simplified with regard to the smaller site plans and make that site plan review process as economic as possible for minor changes. The 5,000 square foot disturbance of the land. That hasn't not been put in final form. There'll be some interesting discussion tomorrow night. Listed on the agenda for tomorrow night is also accessory uses. You will recall that last year a citizen petition proposed adding to the current bylaw that permits attached accessory units, an amendment that would also permit detached accessory units. We recommended, in the town meeting, and the planning board agreed, and the citizens behind the petition agreed to, and the town ultimately voted to establish a study committee to look into the impacts of adding detached accessory units as permissible units. That study committee report is really not due until next year. So I don't really expect a proposed bylaw this year, although the item does appear on the planning board's agenda for tomorrow night. And finally, the agenda also includes other potential zoning amendments. And I don't know what they could be, other than if some emerge from a joint meeting between the planning board and the zoning board of appeals, which I think is taking place tonight. Is that right, Matt?
I thought it was tomorrow. Might be right.
Well, in any event, we have no specifics on that. I'm sorry, Matt. The planning board is aware of the December 2nd deadline for submissions of warrant articles that would amend the zoning bylaw. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Andy. And Daveline, the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust.
So a few items from the Affordable Housing Trust. First, the property at Whiting Street has been conveyed from the town to Habitat for Humanity. And the structures on it were due to be demolished by the end of October. I don't know if that actually physically happened or not. And Habitat will begin its fundraising and its work to build 2 houses on that property. So that's good news, and that's off of the trust workload now. The property on Road Circle is almost ready for the marketing process that will go on. They're they have to divide, it's a duplex on Road Circle. They have to divide the basement area so that they can actually have the condo documents and then have it so it will be 2 separate units that will be sold. So that's in the process. And town council is working on those condo documents and also the final things to get it on the housing inventory. The Lincoln School Apartments, the contract for the windows replacement has been awarded. It's a $1.2 million contract. The plan is to have the windows in place. The goal is by the fall of 2022, they'll start the process in the winter of making them and then installing them, they hope, in the summer. That will use up the annual town meeting allocation from 2016 of $1 million for the capital appropriation for the windows. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to say, the Ridgewood Crossing property, which hasn't been talked about a lot, that's a property that the owner was ordered to convey that property to the town, refused to do so under a contempt order, did so on November 8th. I guess it sounded like that was a better option than to be held in contempt. So the town now has taken possession of that property and done some immediate sort of removal of junk and changing of locks, and we'll have to do some significant renovation before that property will be back to be marketed and sold again. In terms of things that may come up, that they are on the CPC list. They've requested $100,000, and there's a variety of reasons why. So that's one part of the warrant articles. But the additional, you might remember from last year, there was the question about that property on Rockland Hall Street and whether that could be developed and turned and purchased by the town. That's still in discussion, so it may or may not come up. It's just not clear yet. And I think that's it.
All right, thank you. Energy Action Committee.
I think that would normally be Bob.
Oh, that was Bob. Yeah, thank you. So, I'm like, wait a minute, who asked for that?
Go
ahead, Matt.
Bob and I didn't coordinate. The one thing that came up with that committee was that sustainability role that Brendan, you mentioned earlier. And I guess there's a similar role at the light plant, which I wasn't aware of. And so there was talk about it, whether or not it was redundant or necessary, and kind of going back and forth about that. But I wasn't on all of the Energy Action Committee. So that was the only note I had from my own notes.
So there's a potential for maybe having that person who's already at the light plant do the dual role, do it for the entire town. Is that the question?
No, I think it was more what I thought it was the roles and responsibilities of each person. Like, what is the actual definition of the role, and that there's enough work for both. It was my interpretation of what they were talking about, but I didn't hear them actually get to a conclusion or a recommendation.
Okay.
Brendan, I saw you nodding. Do you know more about the lighting plant role that exists today?
Yeah, I mean, this is a new position for them, bringing somebody on to look at the whole question of their operations and how sustainable they are, and ultimately predicting how much power the town will need as it moves to greater sustainability. So that is what that person's job is. I think as at least the climate action people were talking about their understanding of the suggestion of a sustainability coordinator. It would be somebody to work with the town departments to move the town departments forward on their efforts to, again, become greener in general, and to then provide information to residents and to businesses about how they too can go greener and consistent with the goals. I think they wouldn't overlap per se, but I suspect a piece would not fall into the town sustainability coordinator because Hingham Light Plant is already invested in that.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks to all the liaisons on all that. And then we just got a couple other items. I just wanted to talk briefly about the budget process, just to give you a quick overview that now we're getting to that delightful time of year when we start talking about the budgets. And I know that Sue Nickerson and her office and all the department heads have been working on putting together the budgets for next year. And Sue's office will be working on putting together the budget books in the coming weeks. And just wanted to show you that these budget books, when they do come out, are very large in these binders. And my puppy chewed on it last year. So anyway, one of the questions that I have for everybody is, I'd like to know if there are any committee members who would like to receive the budget books this year electronically. And what I mean by the data in the budget books, I know Dave, it's the Dave question. The budget books for the new members have all the numbers of the department requests from the Munis system. So it's like this tiny print, okay? But then also all of the budget books contain PowerPoints for each of the departments to explain what they do and why they want what they want, and it's very good overview information. So you can all tell me right now if you want, or you can email me back separately, but that's something that I want to get information out to Sue's team as soon as possible about if you want it electronically this year. So I have Dave.
Julie.
Anybody else?
Is it
Brenda?
Is it possible to get it divided? As in, I would appreciate the budget sheets in paper, but the PowerPoints visible by digital.
I will check on that. I know that Michelle and I, Sue, if you can help me recall in the weekly meetings, we talked about that briefly, and maybe Michelle said that was possible.
I think she said she could pull them apart, but I'm not positive.
Okay.
I'm going old school. I'll take it printed.
Wait, Nancy, what are you saying? Sorry.
I'll take it printed.
Everything printed.
One thing that I do like to write all over, so.
Okay. Andy, what were you saying?
I would like it printed, but I wanted to suggest that are the liaison assignments for the budgets for last year on the website? I think the answer to that is yes.
Well, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but they are on the website. Actually, I updated the document again today because I didn't have the Climate Action Committee name right. And also I wanted to add the Foster School Building Committee team, but so I'll have the website updated, but I'll get to that in a second, Andy. Okay.
What I was going to suggest is that especially for people who have budgets they haven't done before,
yep,
they should feel free to call the person who did it last year or in a previous year, so that having the list from last year is very helpful, I think.
Okay, I can send that out to everybody. I have last year's list. Thanks. Sarah, were you the one raising your hand?
Yeah, just for electronic, please.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, you can change your mind. Oh, sorry, Tina?
Paper, please.
All right, so the budget books or the electronic form, that you're going to be getting, we have, they're all broken out into budget categories. So we have general government, public safety, public works, human services, benefits and debt service, culture and recreation, and employee benefits. And so, and then separately, we're going to get our school department requests for the school budget. That's going to come later via the ACES team. And then capital outlay will also be separate. And we're going to kick off our budget hearings on December 7th. And hopefully, let's see, December 7th, we're kicking off the budget hearings, and it's going to be starting off with the general government budgets. And those budgets are things such as town clerk, treasurer, town hall, select board. And then our second meeting in December is on the 14th, and that will, we'll finish up general government and also do the human services budgets. But the progress that we make in December is predicated on how the select board does in its hearings. When we get the budget books in, the select board has to hear the budgets first, and then we hear the budgets right after them. And sometimes it's on the same night. Select board hears the budget, and then we get a text from their meeting that now we can go ahead and hear the budget for advisory committee. And I just want to point out that in our advisory committee handbook, section 7 has terrific information, all the information that you need to understand the workflow of the budget hearing process. So I really do encourage you to review it. Evan, read it for the first time. And if you're a team leader or a subcommittee chair, I'll be in contact with you along the way to make sure that all the hearings get scheduled, and so everybody knows what's going on. And then anyone who's a liaison, your team leader will get in contact with you about splitting up who does what budget. So just want to make sure that I've covered everything on the budgets and who wants it in print and not. Oh, and so then the other thing is that I sent the liaison spreadsheet again today. And so that's another way of making sure you understand what budget area that you're going to be covering. Though I do not consider Foster School Building Committee to be a budget, but that's the only place in the chart that I had room. So I did add that to the end of the piece, the page of the budgets. Okay, so any questions right now about the budget process? Brenda.
Government budgets are to be discussed on December 7th. We need the budget books.
I know.
3 weeks from today.
And I know.
And there's Thanksgiving in the middle. So
I know. And it's always a tight start. A close, tight time frame between when you get the budget books and when we have our first hearing. So we're going to. The question is,
will department heads be willing to talk with us about their budgets now rather than waiting till after Thanksgiving?
There are no budgets until you get a budget book.
Okay, so there are no budgets.
And is that still scheduled to come Wednesday before Thanksgiving?
As far as I know.
And will they be, for those of us who are killing trees, will they be delivering them like they have the last couple of years?
As far as I know.
Okay. Now the DPW has learned how to find my condo.
And Brenda, the only reason why I say that is because the department request might not be the same as the town administrator's recommendation. So there is no budget until you get that budget book.
But if we're expecting them to come out the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, then presumably we have the, 9 days after Thanksgiving to get our meetings scheduled and conversations held. So can we schedule them beforehand? Will people welcome scheduling meetings? I'm going to have trouble. I'm going to have trouble getting 4 different meetings scheduled in that 1 week unless I start working on it now. So is the point, right? So,
okay. My experience is they love to talk with us.
Fair enough. Deal. Okay. Right.
Yeah,
so,
and
the government team.
The general government budgets are generally the most simple. That's why they come first. They're pretty straightforward, I would say, for the most part. And so the more complicated budgets, such as like Department of Public Works and the police and fire, those will be coming, they'll be coming up in January. So not to worry, Brenda, but I will have my weekly meeting with the town administrator's office tomorrow, and I will give you all the latest and greatest.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, for the general government, sometimes you're interviewing the same person for two different budgets. So it becomes easy in that context.
Yeah, no, I matched them up as best I could when I divided them. So yes.
Yeah. Okay, so any other questions right now about the budget process? Okay, and then our last agenda item is discussion of advisory committee housekeeping items. And I mentioned that we're going to meet next on December 7th. We're also going to be able to discuss the fund balance memo on December 7th, right, Sue? Probably. So that will be exciting.
I'm planning on it.
Planning on it. And then December 14th, we'll continue with the budget hearings, and also we will, we're going to try to have a discussion about wage classification with some folks from the personnel board at that meeting, so that we can hear the latest on that. And just to sort of process it, go ahead, Andy.
Has the select board scheduled hearings on the budgets?
They have not officially scheduled the hearings yet, but I've been talking to the select board's office about making sure, obviously, that they will hear the budgets before us. And they have a meeting on November 30th. So the week before our December 7th meeting. So they'll should be able to chip away at some of the budgets by then, or the early part of the December 7th evening, where we could hear first from the, go over the fund balance memo and take care of other business first, and then go into the budgets that the select board will hear earlier in that evening.
And just to be clear, while our committee typically does not hear the budgets until after the select board has, there is no restriction on a liaison from our board, from our committee, speaking to the department head before the select board has heard that department's budget.
That is correct. And it's a very good clarification, Andy. Thank you. And then finally, just sort of a point of process that as the winter goes on, we're going to have a lot of meetings and we're going to have a lot of data that we're going to be giving, emailing out to each other ahead of meetings. And so we mostly are meeting on Tuesday evenings. And so I wanted to ask if it's at all possible for any materials that are going to be discussed on a Tuesday meeting, if we could get a copy of the materials, like say the draft comment for a warrant article, if it is at all possible to submit them to the full advisory committee by the Friday before, so that people have a chance to review the materials over the weekend. Sometimes it's just not possible. And sometimes things happen, you know, over the weekend or last minute before a meeting, but if at all possible, because people have jobs and they work during the day on Tuesday, it's sometimes hard to keep up with reviewing the materials for the meeting. So anyway, that's what we're going to hopefully strive for this year. Okay, any matters not anticipated within 48 hours of meeting? All right, can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, for my roll call vote. There's no Bob, there's no George. Nancy?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Evan?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Daveline?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
No Caitlin. Sarah?
Aye.
All right, meeting's adjourned.